For those who have joined today and were not present last time, for their information, the last lecture has been converted to a video and has been uploaded to YouTube. And the link is already shared. If somebody hasn't got it, please register your email ID or telephone number. We will send the link to you, and we would await your feedback also on that. This lecture, after it is complete, also will be uploaded within 3 to 4 days time for information. And the link also will be sent to you. To a certain extent, 1 week is not a long time. However, uh, considering the gravity of the subject, I thought maybe we can take a quick review of what we did last time. Uh, it will be quick and real quick because today also we have a lot of ground to cover, which I hope to complete it a little earlier so that we will have more time today for questions and answers. So, for those people who have joined today, the activity for these two sessions was started a long time back, about 2 years back. And actually, we used to meet even before that, about 3 years back. And after 1 year's deliberation, we thought that maybe we'll put the thoughts together and convert it into a kind of a thought system. And that effort was initiated to a certain extent by me and was supported greatly by all the team members, uh, Rajiv Sane, Mr. Ashok Rao, Nirfara K, and Dr. Ajay Brahmanakar. Okay, and fortunately, we had a team which is multidisciplinary, which was essential for such a controversial topic to be presented to the general people. Now for the review. Last time, what we have seen is that the conceptual and technology bootstraps have improved our quality of life, and we dwelled quite a bit onto what is meant by bootstrap and what is conceptual bootstrap and the technological bootstrap. And we said that there is no doubt that both these bootstrap have carried us from 80,000 years back to date, and they have definitely improved at least our material quality of life. However, our tools have brought us to a state where silicon agents can become smarter than their creators, which are carbon agents. Now, last time we had introduced two terms, ROSEPs and SciSeps, and we said the word seps is from sapiens. Sapiens corresponds to wisdom, and then SciSapiens is we ourselves, who have more inclination towards psychology or sentience, and ROSEPs who have more inclination or more capability, I would say, not only inclination, it's capability towards what we call it as cognitive abilities. Now, ROSEPs and SciSeps is a current state. What can happen is that if unregulated development takes place, then maybe we ourselves may integrate to something like carbon agents, and ROSEPs might, elevate to a level of what we call it as silicon agents. The term agent is quite a generic one, and it will describe both the ROSEPs and SciSeps, and also carbon agents and silicon agent. Agent is any entity whose behavior to the external world not only depends on the current inputs but also depends on the interaction they had previously with respect to their environment. That means they must have some certain kind of a memory experiences stored inside their integral whole. Any such entity, we will call it as an agent. Okay. So we ourselves, Homo sapiens, definitely fall into that category. But more recently, the robots, intelligent robots, okay, to say the least, have started to get into that particular category. So they are the silicon agents because the basic processing architecture is based on silicon. But these are the agents. Agents have their own internal life. And last time we also saw in quite a good detail what is meant by internal world and what is meant by external world, and we said that we will deviate from our current academics and also the way we have learned through the classification of knowledge into various fields, various branches of knowledge, and we had a new look at that both in terms of internal structure or internal world and the external world. And both these terms are extremely important because the agents have both an internal world and they can perceive the external world. We have also seen that our old wisdom is no proper guide for a solution as it is too idealistic and not value based and future driven. Uh, all our previous wisdom can be summarized into basically three branches. One we can say religion, another we can say philosophy, and third we can say science, and its associated part which is technology. Unfortunately, religion has also a technology. Okay, philosophy unfortunately does not have a technology, if at all. I mean, there is nothing like a counterpart for philosophy in terms of practical use of that particular discipline of knowledge. Religion, good or bad, whatever it might be, has a counterpart, okay, in terms of commandments, in terms of whatever values, and so on and so forth. And science definitely has because it has a counterpart called as a technology. We also said that initially, when we started, long time back, 80,000 years back, it was technology which led science, and then over a period of time, maybe when we reached somewhere about 3000 years back, philosophy entered. Much before that, religion had already made its inroads into the human minds, and the science in a real sense of it started only in the 16th century. Until that time, technology was leading science, and eventually from 1600 to 2000, year 2000, science took over, technology was lagging, and technology required science, proven science, okay, to convert that science into usable, what we call as products, services, and the science themselves created its own memes. After year 2000, again there is a twist in the whole situation. The technology is leading science because the science previously dealt with what we call it as a passive world, to a certain extent active world of robots. Okay, however, uh, the way our external world is configured today, consisting of number of different kinds of entities, okay, they were technologically created, not science created. And another thing is in the whole affair, as we will going to be seeing in a few slides today, the point is that the technology is ahead and we do not have a real good theories, real good testable theories, real good measurable theories of things like sentience, intelligence, consciousness, wisdom, and so on. So, however, our silicon agents are already becoming smarter and smarter day by day. Actually, it should be, we should say hour by hour, because that's the rate at which they are going in intelligence. And we are lacking in having a corresponding conceptual framework. Okay. And technologists never bothered about sentience and intelligence and wisdom and conscious because it was not directly related to them, being a passive world they used to control. But now, when the intelligent robots have come to such a state that they have created a singularity where they are threatening us to take over, uh, even technologists and the scientists are left with no way but to look at it, look at the terms which normally were dealt with by philosophers and humanities, uh, like consciousness, sentience, and so on and so forth. So we urgently need to find out a mechanism by which we will be able to use technology to improve quality of human life, and at the same time that the silicon agents will not overtake us, that is the carbon agents. I am not saying that we should stop technology, because stopping technology will be suicidal. Probably only 1/10 of the population can survive at this moment of time if we freeze the technology at even at the point where we are. So that's not a viable path. So we have to find out a viable path where the technology continues to improve our quality of life. However, it is not going to threaten us to take us over. So this part 2 is going to be related to what kinds of measures we have to take in order to do that. Now, when I say that silicon agents will overtake carbon agents, okay, in the last lecture you have taken it up as a gospel truth. Okay, I have not said why. I have not given any kind of a justification why this will happen or what makes us think that this will happen. So the first two slides which we are going to cover today will put something which we call it as a plausibility into your minds that such a thing can happen. So we'll look at these two, why we think that the silicon agents will overtake carbon agents. The first two slides will cover that particular part of it. Now, first we will see what is the computation mechanism in these types of agents, both the carbon agents as well as silicon agents. Now, what we are going to consider is the entity which is under consideration, and then in the middle we have the carbon agents, and on the right hand side we will be listing the properties for the silicon agents. The first and the foremost is the physical basis. The physical basis for carbon agents is going to be the carbon and chemistry, the atom, carbon and chemistry. And for the silicon agents, the physical basis, physical layer as we call it. And why I say layer is you will understand that when we are talking about terms like from physical layer to consciousness, a lot of layers come into picture. Okay, so the first layer or the groundmost layer from from where we start as the groundmost layer, even before that is what we call it is microphysics and modern physics and so on. We are not going to touch upon that. However, the ground layer, as far as the computation and consciousness, from computation to consciousness is concerned, we have to distinguish between various steps which has taken place. So the first layer, as I said, is for the carbon agents is a carbon and chemistry. Chemistry is the physical process. All processes are chemical processes. While as far as the silicon agents are concerned, the atom on which it is based is silicon, and the processes are governed by the technology of electronics. Fortunately or unfortunately, both carbon as well as silicon correspond to group 4 of the periodic elements, and it is not surprising. The reason for this is that uh, if you look at the natural life, you will find that the why it is carbon based and not say for example iron based, there are definitely reasons towards that. And the reasons towards that is, if life has to develop, then it is based on what we call it as complex molecules, and complex molecules cannot form except carbon. Carbon is only element which allows us to create long chains of molecules, and long chains of molecules are required as the basis of life. It is not surprising. While for silicon agents, the element silicon has been selected also for a very deep reason. It was previously germanium, okay, on which all electrons was based, but later, in later dates, it shifted from germanium to silicon, because that if you have to have reliable computation, then you need to distinguish at least reliably reliably between what is the zero state and the one state, and reliably under events of all kinds of noises existing into the environment. So the shift was not surprising, because silicon gives me that particular noise immunity because of the band gap between the jumps of the electrons in the outer orbits. So the next layer, as we call it for the computation, is core architecture. And the core architecture, as has been shown here, uh, for the carbon agents is neurons and dendrites. Okay, neurons and dendrites are what we call it as the physical layer, structural basis, and the process of processing takes place. Process required is electrochemical, which we call it as the process of synapses. Okay, while in case of silicon agents, the architecture here, as I have shown, is what we call it as a John von Neumann architecture, and is also commonly known as a stored program architecture. And we are not going to go into details as to why this kind of architecture was a must and what John von Neumann actually did after Turing. Okay, Turing designed a universal computing machine, but the Turing machine could never have been converted to a computer as we see today. It was necessary that John von Neumann worked on that and created something which we call it as a uh, John von Neumann architecture or stored program architecture. Even though Turing machines are universal and whatever can be done by von Neumann architecture machines can also be done by Turing machines, the plain fact is that we cannot build Turing machines to do the number and text and picture and videos and sounds crunching the way we do it today. It would be impossible. The architecture would be impossible. Architecture has got a lot of bearing on the power of computation that one can have. We remember this particular point of uh, architecture affecting the capabilities of computation. Okay, and at this moment of time, we only note that the neuron dendrite and synapse architecture versus stored program architecture and processes being electronics or pulse passing, electrical pulse passing, okay, are different architecture, entirely different architecture. One doesn't correspond to other. Okay, they are apparently absolutely different kind of architectures, and they are also based on different kinds of physics. Now, next layer in the computation is what we call it as problem solving. Okay, we take all computation is essentially for one purpose. Some kind of problem is to be solved. What problem is of no significance at this moment of time, but there is a problem to be solved. Okay. Now, the technique of problem solving in case of carbon agent is entirely different. Okay, and in case of silicon agents or uh, von Neumann architecture machines is entirely different. In case of carbon agents, the architecture of problem solving is called as deep learning. What deep learning is, we are going to eventually see in the second slide. While as far as the problem solving by computers is concerned, generally computers is concerned, we call it as an algorithmic heuristic mechanism. These are the mechanisms. Okay, mechanisms or methods of problem solving. They are also entirely different. They do not correspond to one another. For example, a mechanism which is optimized for a certain kind of problem solving. For example, getting the inputs and converting into the outputs, or getting inputs from the external world in terms of senses and acting on the external world by using our actuation mechanisms. Okay, this is a different affair than getting the inputs in terms of data and crunching it to information is a different kind of problem solving. We carbon agents are extremely poor in terms of what we call it as number crunching. But number crunching does not only mean number crunching. It has associated, it can crunch a picture, it can crunch a video, it can crunch a text and so on and so forth. So method of problem solving is different in carbon agents and silicon agents. Okay, we are just looking at this moment of time, we are only looking at what kinds of differences are there in these two architectures. Okay.
The seeking, data seeking is much easier in deep learning because memory we can.
I will request all the audience, I will definitely give a lot of time for questions and answers today, because otherwise maybe it is a case that it's already covered in the presentation to come. Then we look at what we call it as the primary purpose of problem solving. This is important. Okay, now we have slowly started moving from something like physics, okay, to something which is called as what is the purpose of problem solving. Okay, and in case of carbon agents, the purpose of problem solving is to survive. Okay, the basic purpose in carbon agents is to survive. And survive in what? Survive means we have to look for events which occur in the external world, okay, which are known to us through our senses, and we have to act on the external world in such a way that we seek for safety, food, and whatnot. Okay, so the basic purpose in case of carbon agents in computation is survival, and then safety, and then according to Maslow we have a lot of things. However, in case of the reason why computers were developed was to essentially solve mathematical problems, number crunching problems, or the problem that computers originally designed were to convert data into knowledge. Okay, because even in case of Homo sapiens, there are two things. One is a sentience branch towards consciousness, and another is a cognitive branch towards consciousness. And in case of a cognitive branch, we are purely talking about crunching the data in certain ways. In case of sentience and that path, we are talking about attaching something which we call it as the emotional tags, subjective feelings, and so on and so forth. So the purpose of computation in silicon agents had been different, and in carbon agents also had been different. The carbon agents are best at what we call it as a general intelligence. Okay. And the silicon agents are best at what we call it as specific expertise. We have taken two examples in the last lecture, making it very clear what is meant by a general intelligence and what is meant by a specific expertise. I need not repeat that here. Okay. To give you some kind of little bit a different viewpoint for general intelligence, we have taken an example of buoyancy and how general intelligence will look at buoyancy and how specific expertise will look at buoyancy. General intelligence is like, say for example, it's like a lake with a lot of islands, small islands in a lake, and then around the lake is the terrestrial land, and it gets certain kinds of inputs. Each island in the lake, okay, is a mechanism to solve one particular problem. Another island is a mechanism to solve another particular problem. One mechanism is to drive a car, to solve a problem called as driving a car. Another mechanism might be, okay, storing a smell of rose okay, and distinguishing it from a smell of some other material. Okay, it is the smell which classifies which objects, physical objects in the external world could be benevolent to me and malevolent to me. So these all these small little islands are essentially mechanisms to solve small problems. Okay, and they are in a lake. So if something happens in the extraterrestrial and some stone is dropped into the lake, it will create ripples. And those ripples will go to the respective island. They will find out whether they correspond to me or not. If yes, they will talk to other islands and so on and so forth. This is the kind of a general intelligence architecture which we are talking about. But as far as the specific expertise is concerned, like what we are saying, chess playing, okay, nothing of that sort is required. Okay, you require a deeper understanding only in one branch of knowledge. Okay. So their carbon agents are based at what we call it as general intelligence, while silicon agents can do the job of specific expertise far superiorly than carbon agents can do. Memory. In case of carbon agents, where is the memory? Okay. The memory is inside the structure. It's a structural memory. Okay. And what does that mean is that the connections which exist between neuron to neuron, the connections which exist between the number of different neurons, every time I want to store something as a memory, every time I want to memorize something, a connection is established between one neuron to another neuron, and probably that connection is assigned with a strength. So memory is in terms of connections, dendrites or connections between neurons. And to give you a rough idea as to what is the size that we are talking about, the number of neurons in the average human being inside the skull, including all parts of brain, are somewhere around 100 billion. That's the size of the neuron. And one neuron can connect from 1 to 10,000 different neurons. Okay, so you can imagine that what kind of structural complexity appears in case of a brain. And this is a structural complexity which has to get burnt. When we say we learn something, it only means that certain neurons are connected with certain neurons by establishing the connection. That's all. That's all that there is to it. Okay, so one neuron can connect to 10,000, up to 10,000 different neurons. That does not mean that 100 billion neurons each is connected to 10,000 different neurons. Not like that. It's a top limit. For example, if the event contains a data, event contains some information which is crucial for life, okay, it will be connected to a number of different neurons because we need an action much faster because survival is at stake. So in case of carbon agents, the memorization is in terms of neuron connections. The mechanism in which we use in computers, short program computers, is that the memorization is in something which we call it as charge buckets. Okay, originally when in the infancy of computers, the memorization was through flip-flops. Okay, but if you look at the current technology of computers, it is no more flip-flops. We have on a silicon substrate, we have something which we call it as charge buckets created. And when I want to, for a particular bucket, say for example, if I want to remember 1, I drop a charge into it, and when I want to remember 0, I take the charge out and deplete it somewhere else, and then I have a 0 and a 1, but it's in charge buckets. And how many charge buckets can there be? Okay, in a typical computers that we are talking about, we are currently using, okay, the charge buckets, the memorization could be huge in terms of terabytes. Okay, which is also not a small number. So as far as the connections is concerned, maybe at this moment of time, at this state of computation, we are richer. Okay, But the point is that the architectures are still pretty different. Okay, one is optimized for living, another is optimized for crunching, data crunching. We go to the next level, and we call that as an adaptive learning. In case of human beings, there are two kinds of learning, which is one is a very slow learning, very slow learning. I will call that as a race learning, which is through genetics. Okay, the other type of a learning is what we call it as human learning, where, as we said, that we burn the neurons, burn the connections between neurons, and we, so to say, memorize how to solve a particular problem. And there could be several numbers of problems. If you take an average human being, how many problems can he solve at a particular moment of time? How many, so to say, islands he has got to solve problems? There are not many. If you think that they are very large, they are not many. But the point is that if there is a new situation, okay, he can create something which we call it as a new set of neurons and connections between them, okay, and attach payoffs to it. That means a learning is possible, adaptive learning, adaptation to the environment, taking clues from the environment in terms of sensing and actuating and then effects of actuation, and then building it back into my neuron structure or neuron dendrite structure, so that I remember, so that next time that problem comes, I will fare better. This is called as a learning. So in case of as far as adaptive learning is concerned, the carbon agent surpass the computers. Okay, or I will modify the statement. They used to surpass the silicon agents. But the way computers were designed initially, it was not for this particular purpose. It was basically for number crunching, basically for cognitive processing. Okay, so here is a case, in case of carbon agent, computation in carbon agents, which is excellent compared to silicon agents. Okay. Up to this is fine. We still don't have to worry too much. Everything is fine. We are better in terms of certain things. The silicon agents are better in certain ways, and we can use silicon agents to advantage of humanity. Okay. Now the next three rows which I'm going to present will make the case as to why should now we be worried about silicon agents. The first point of worry is input output. That means sensors and actuators. In case of us, we have 5 sensors and 5 maybe Karmendriya or actuation mechanisms. In case of silicon agents, which have a robotic shell, not only a skull, I mean not only a computer inside a robotic shell. If we consider computer inside a robotic shell, okay, then the number of input outputs can be huge. And for each input, the range in which we can sense is huge compared to human agents. And this is not new. Okay, we were always poor with respect to other animals in one or two of this, but we were never so poor in terms of a totality of input and outputs. That's the point. That's the point. So in case of carbon agents, the input output capability is restricted. In case of silicon agents, they are enhanced, and the enhancements are taking place at a breathtaking rate. The next point of worry is that simulation. We call that as a simulation. Simulation is nothing but, suppose there is one mechanism and there is another mechanism. Okay? And if we have two mechanisms, can we simulate mechanism 1 by using mechanism 2, or can we simulate mechanism 2 by using mechanism 1? Okay, this is known as simulation. Simulation means behaving as if I am a mechanism 1. okay, or behaving as if I am a mechanism too. The two mechanisms which we are talking about is a mechanism in carbon agents and a mechanism in silicon agents. Now, as far as simulation is concerned, the architecture of computation at various different levels which we have talked up till now, by using this, we cannot simulate silicon agents. We simply cannot simulate silicon agents. That means we have to give up. We have to simply give up that we will be able to, in our brain, we will be able to mimic a computer. People say that the computer cannot mimic humans. I am saying that the humans cannot mimic the computer, but the computers will mimic the brain. Okay, that means the type of the architecture of solutions to different problems, either general intelligence or specific intelligence. In any way, for specific intelligence or specific expertise, computers were better. Okay, but the moment we have a better mechanism of processing and memory, in terms of numbers, okay, that means memory in not only in terabytes but in terabytes, okay, or processing speed in terms of uh, very many times. But I must say that at this moment of time I will also compare that what kind of a processing speed that a carbon agent has got and what kind of a processing speed a silicon agent has got. Processing speed, okay, has got something with the physical basis, okay, and simulation has got something to do with the mechanisms of solving the problem, okay. The silicon agents can easily simulate the mechanism of carbon agents. Carbon agents can never simulate mechanism of silicon agents. This is a point of worry. Now, coming back to our physical basis, okay, the rate, speed at which synapses travel, okay, that means between one neuron to another neuron, is somewhere around 100 meters per second. Okay, that means if the one neuron is away from another neuron by 100 meters, and it can be away by that much distance very much, because if you take neurons and dendrites and couple them together, probably will go to sun in a single human brain's architecture. So 100 meters per second is the speed at which synapses will pass. Okay, in case of silicon agents or computers, silicon computers, which we are talking about, the speed is 3 into 10 raised to 8 meters per second. That is the speed of light. Huge, no comparison. As a skeptic, we immediately say, ha. The point is that I can simultaneously trigger to number of different neurons at 100 meter per second speed. Okay, so it is not only the physical speed of synapse transfer, it also depends upon something which we call it as to how many neurons that signal is passed. When we are talking about this kind of comparison, it is known as a bandwidth comparison, and a bandwidth is nothing but something which we call it as, okay, speed into size. Okay, so who wins at this moment of time? Today's state, who wins? Okay, in terms of speed into size, because it is the bandwidth which decides the processing speed, total processing speed. It is not speed which decides only. Okay, so currently, if you look at it, the situation is that the silicon agents are almost at par in terms of processing speeds to carbon agents. Okay, and growing at rate, which we had seen in the last lecture, at exponential rate, while the carbon agents are growing only linearly. Okay, this is the trouble. So the trouble is at physical level. The trouble is at the what we call it as at architectural level, because the architecture of carbon agents can never simulate the architecture of the uh, silicon agents, while silicon agents can do that. So in terms of bandwidth, both of them are at par at this moment of time. In terms of input output, silicon agents have surpassed us long time back, very, very long time back, at least 20 years back they have surpassed. Okay, but that was not a problem because it was not still integrated intelligence. Okay. As far as simulation is concerned, from the architectural point of view, the von Neumann architecture is far superior, I must say, that because it can simulate any computation that can exist in any form. Okay, and that was the biggest contribution of Turing and von Neumann. Okay, that they were universal machine. They can simulate anything. Turing machine can simulate any kind of a computation, and von Neumann architecture can also simulate any kind of computing architecture at a practical level. Turing was not at a practical level. So this is the trouble. This is the trouble. That's why I said I will give a justification as to why we should worry about the pace at which things are changing. Lastly, we look at something which we call it as enhancement, possibility of enhancements. And what kinds of enhancements? Enhancement in terms of bits and time. Bits means storage capacity and time means the speed at which we can communicate. Okay. Now, currently they are at par, but as far as the carbon agents are concerned, okay, they are restricted by the skull. They are restricted by the skull. While as far as the silicon agents are concerned, okay, there is no restriction. There simply is no restriction. That means this is the reason why they are growing at something which we call it as an exponential rate. And this is the trouble. This is the cause of concern. Okay. So we really do not know, even if they were surpassing us only in terms of cognitive abilities, we would not have been worried too much. Okay, we would have been worried, or rather, we would have been very proud that we created something, okay, which never existed, which nature couldn't do. We have created something which nature couldn't do. But the point is that it doesn't remain there. Okay, because there is a thin line between intelligence and sentience and consciousness, and that is the trouble. That is the cause of trouble. Okay. So we will move to the next slide, and what we are going to do in the next slide is we will look at the mechanisms of deep learning. We talked about deep learning, okay, and what the current research which is taking place in computer science or AI, okay, is to create deep learning. Okay. So when I talked about Internet of Things, okay, Internet of Things requires that the agents have a capability to do a deep learning. Okay, not a, deep learning will give autonomy. Deep learning will give autonomy to the agents. So let us see deep learning. Okay. This is the architecture. This is the architecture we talked about. Okay, it's a carbon agents architecture, and this is the architecture, typical architecture of what we call it as deep learning. This is an architecture from carbon agents. This is how in our skulls, okay, deep learning takes place, or learning takes place, and then deep learning takes place. For some people it is only learning, okay, and for some people it is deep learning. Okay, even in humans there is a difference. Okay, learning and deep learning is different. Okay, I will also at some point of time I will also say that we are cursing zombies, and what a zombie is we will see eventually, but there are many humans who are zombies. In fact, the students which leave out 10th standard or 12th standard, okay, if you look, if you scratch the surface, you will see that they are zombies. They are really not learnt anything. Okay, there is no learning. Okay, and if there is no learning, it's only simulation. It is mimicking, not even simulation. It is mimicking. Okay, and mimicking is not learning. Learning is essential for survival and growth. Okay. The deep learning mechanism goes like this, something like this. Okay, you have something which we call it as input node, and what we call it as node, you can take it roughly as a neuron. Okay, so there is a layer of neurons which we call it as input neurons, and from where do they get the first synapses? From our senses, because we are talking about the input neurons. So they get the synapses, okay, from all our senses, because actually our processing system is a distributed system. Our sensor and actuators are not inside brain. Brain has no sensor. Okay, even if you pinch a brain, there is nothing like pain. Okay, but all the senses are connected in very intricate ways, okay, to input neurons. So we call them as input neurons. Then from input neurons, ultimately, we have to move towards output nodes. And what are the output nodes? These are the actuators. These are actuators of our system. Okay, it could be signaling, it could be speaking, it could be throwing, it could be running, whatever it might be. These are our outputs. Okay. So moving from inputs to outputs, okay, is what we call it as an island. Okay, island of experience, okay, or island of expertise, specific expertise for that. For example, driving, car driving, okay, and the expertise is so good. I mean, this car driving, for example, is so good that even if you change from one car to another car, okay, you immediately, even if you have not driven the second type of a car, immediately you can start driving the car. The reason is adaptation, ability to adapt. Okay, so from input nodes we move to the output nodes, and driving is one example, swimming is another, climbing is tree, running from the enemy, okay, teasing a person. There could be, I mean, you think of it, and then you have the islands, huge number of islands, huge. Okay. So this is the type of the architecture, and how this deep learning goes. From the input nodes, you have to move to the output nodes, and synapses which are available, which are obtained by the input nodes, okay, through a layer of hidden nodes. Hidden means we don't name them with a specific this thing, through a layer, and these layers can be many. The layers could be as large as 10,000 also, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so one, say for example, if these are the input nodes, this could be vision, okay, this could be hearing, and suppose we are driving, okay, both vision as well as hearing is required. Okay, and then they are connected to this number of these things, and so on and so forth. And then I have the output node, which is my hands, which is turning the wheel, okay, or pressing a horn, which we always do. God knows why. Okay, so to move from here to here, there is a there is a small there is a small section inside our brain, okay, which says that this is my learning. I mean, this is my driving, this is my swimming. So all human learning, all human intelligence, all human intelligence and sentience, okay, is only of this particular kind, input neurons to output neurons. However, we will see when we move a little bit ahead that, okay, this architecture which we have seen, okay, we distinguish between two different kinds of architectures. This is what happens when a, there is a sweep from input neurons to output neurons. Okay, but there is something quite different. Okay, we are still not talked about learning, because who burned those neurons, or who burned those connections, and how did we burn these connections? Okay, so we have to look for something, other mechanism, some other mechanism has to exist. Okay, now I keep it aside, keep this particular diagram in your mind, and let us see. We start with something which we call it as a data store. Okay, now I must say this is a model. Okay, what kind of a model is this? Okay, is it a physical model by which actually things are happening? No. Okay, what kind of model is this? This model is generally to explain you how processing takes place in human brains. Okay, they will not correspond to means they may not be pointing exactly to the mechanisms in actual world that come into existence. Okay, but in essence this something of this kind happens. There is a data store, and what kind of a data store? Obviously by dendrite connections or neuron connections. Okay, we start with data store for one simple reason, because we are going to introduce models, okay, which operate on the data store. Uh, this is very different. In case of silicon agents, okay, it is the processor which is the prime entity, okay, and the data is a secondary entity. In case of deep learning or brain architecture, it is the data which is primary entity and processing is secondary entity, okay, in a certain sense. Okay. So we start with data store. The data store consists of actually four kinds of layers. Okay. Now, these are not the layers which we talked about, or they roughly correspond to these layers, roughly. Okay. The first layer is what we call it as an event base. Okay. An event occurs in the external world. Okay. And the event base is also a memory, but it's a short-term memory. Okay. Why? What is a short-term memory and a long-term memory? We will eventually and essentially see also. But event base consists of entities which we call it as event. Okay. Then E tag, that is emotion tag which we attach to that event. Then an information tag which we attach to that event. Then an actuation tag that we again attach to that event. I am talking about a single event. I am going to take two examples and we are going to move through this mechanism. Okay. And the last we call it as a P tag, which is we call it as a payoff tag. Okay. That means what was the payoff of my action. Okay. So this is an event base. This is a temporary. Whether it will be converted into a permanent store is different. Okay, when it will be converted and will it be converted is a different a different affair. But we have two kinds of long-term storages. One we can call it as a knowledge base, which consists of our knowledge about space, time, objects, agents, structures in the external world and processes. This is our knowledge base. And we also have an experience base, or we can call that as, this is also a long term, you can call that as a qualia base also if you want. Okay, and it will consist of an event, the emotions associated with that event, or a group of events as the case may be. The qualia, I mean my subjective experience or subjective feeling about that, and encounter. Now I will explain what is meant by the term encounter. Encounter is what happens in the external world. Okay, a event occurs in an external world. I sense that event. Okay, I process that. Hmm. Produce it to something which we call it as an actuation. That actuation goes into the external world. The external world, in its own right, which consists, if it is only passive objects, nothing is going to happen further. Because there, I mean, if I throw a stone, if I kick a stone, okay, it is not going to kick me back. Okay, but if I kick a person, he is going to definitely kick me back. Okay, so there is a, for that particular action, there a input event is again triggered and this chain goes on. Okay, and eventually this chain will stop. Eventually this chain will stop. The set of events and the way it progress, okay, we can club them together into something which we call it as event based. So a group of events together can be clubbed into something which we call it as an encounter. Okay, and that encounter is my experience. That encounter is my experience. Okay, so this we call it as an experience base. And apart from these three, which is event based, which is individual and short term, knowledge base, which is long term, and why knowledge base is required, when I move through the example, you will realize that experience based, as I have talked about, and agent profile. Okay, the same event, if different agents, individuals are subjected to the same event, they may not react in the same fashion. Okay, why is that so? Okay, because each agent has its own profile. Okay, that we call it as a profile of that particular agent. And what does the profile consist of? Profile is that particular part of the memory which is very rarely updated, very rarely updated, and it consists of beliefs, benevolence. Benevolence means a person by nature may be benevolent or malevolent. We can't say that. Okay, so that is his. I mean that is a. He may be neither be benevolent or malevolent. He may be neutral also. But it's a profile. Okay, benevolence profile. It's a belief base, not challenged. It's never challenged. However, when we are living in everyday world, we never look at, when we react, probably we never look through the layers of this which we are talking about, but our behavior reflects that. Okay, and then agent profile, which will consist of beliefs, benevolence, pursuits that a person has or that agent has. I will not say person, because I am going to show that the same can be done by the agents, silicon agents. So the pursuits and the values it attaches to events. Okay, so this is what we call it as the data store. This is a must for a agent to react, I mean, to the external event or external world in terms of inputs and outputs. Now, the two models which we have to consider, okay, processing models which we have to consider on this particular data store. Sorry, my mistake. One I call it as a transaction model, and another I call it as a improvisation model. Okay. In case of a transaction model, what happens is from the inputs we process it for tags, which we talked about, the emotion tag, the actuation tag, and number of different tags, and action. From that we create actions. Those actions go into the outputs. Now, these outputs could be, I mean, this output could pass to the external world or may not pass to the external world. Okay, that means even if my friend comes and kicks me, I may not do anything. I can just stay put, do nothing. Okay, no action from my side. This can also happen. Okay, but that does not mean that the action is not internally taken. Okay, an agent means he has got an internal world, and if he has got an internal world, there always is an action which is either associated with the internal affair or with the external affair, or both, as the case may be. So a transaction model is from inputs to outputs to inputs to outputs and so on for a particular encounter. Okay, and eventually that encounter will end. Okay, like that encounter, as we said, that he kicked me, I kicked him, then a lot of people gathered. Okay, and then jane do, encounter closed. Okay, that's an encounter, that's an experience. Okay, this is the transaction model. That transaction means the agent, is interacting with the external world. And whatever interactions take place, we club them under what we call it as transactions. There are internal transactions. Okay. For example, we talked about the payoff tag. However, these internal transactions do not take place at the space-time of encounter. They take place off the encounter, when the encounter is not taking. For example, okay, sleep. One of the reason that sleep is there is that we have to convert something from the short-term memory to long-term memory. All shuffling is taking place, and when this shuffling is taking place, okay, there are random associations which also take place, and then we get a clear kind of a dream. Okay, but shuffling takes place. Shuffling definitely takes place. Shuffling is an unconscious process for us. Sometimes the shuffling can also be a conscious process. Okay, but what happens in case of shuffling is we use the individual events in an encounter and their associated tags, whether they were E tags or P tags or whatever it might be. So, and their payoffs, and from the payoffs, okay, we process the payoffs, okay, again, and shuffle and strengthen our data store. And when we shuffle and strengthen our data store, we are doing the learning. This is the kind of the learning that we are doing. Okay, this is what we call it as a deep learning, unless the encounter is not revisited either consciously or unconsciously, learning is not going to take place. Okay, so some people say that recital is bad way of learning. Recital is still required. Okay, but let's not go into theories of learning and so on. But this kind of a model is also required for um, how to teach and how to learn. Okay, not only that. So this is what we call it as improvisations on our data source. So the next time the friend comes and kicks me, okay, what he is going to get is, since I was weak, I did not react. But when I know that I already have pressed button on my mobile and my friend who is stronger than him comes and kicks him out, okay, this is what is going to happen. This is the kind of the things are taking place, okay, and this is what we call it as a deep learning model of processing. Okay, this is entirely different from what we are talking about number crunching. Obviously it is different from number crunching. The point, however, is that can my computer, which is a von Neumann architecture computer, simulate whole of this story? Okay, if it can, okay, if it can, then my computer can do a deep learning. Okay, and it will be able to behave to the external world exactly in a similar fashion. I will not say same fashion, similar fashion, because the same person does not behave the same way to the same event. Okay, in a similar fashion he can behave into the external world. Now I said that we have to process for tags, whether we have to process for tags and actions in case of transactions, or whether we have to process for reshuffles and strengthening of neuron connections. Okay, it's different story, but we have to process. Okay, and what are my tools for processing? I have essentially two tools for processing. One kind of tools for processing is intelligence and wisdom. Okay, these are cognitive tools. These are essentially cognitive tools, and what intelligence and wisdom will do will be, okay, will reflect itself into something which we call it as a knowledge base. Okay, it is the intelligence and wisdom part of the processing tools which update my knowledge base, and another set of tools is sentience and consciousness, and they will update my experience base. Okay, how I have to update my experience base. Okay, and it is also the sentience and consciousness which will, on a very long term basis, may update my belief base, benevolence, pursuits and values. It can update my profile, and very few people are there who can update their profile. Okay, and if they are updating it for benevolence is good. If they are updating for malevolence, which can also happen, okay, many good people have also turned into, I mean, people, malevolent people. This can happen. Okay, so these are my processing tools. So this is a kind of an architecture. No, I will not say this is a kind of a model. I'm not saying architecture. Okay, this is a kind of a model which is what the agents can use. This is what our brains use to a rough scale. Okay, a model becomes a mechanism, okay, when there is a one-one correspondence between the entities in the model which we are talking about, okay, and the physical mechanisms through which happens, okay, that when there is a isomorphism between entities in the model and entities in the physical layer, we say that we have a working, or we have a predictive model. We have created a predictive model of the whole situation. Okay. Now let's pass through this model to events. The first event is traffic jam, which we are everyday used to. Okay, I get into traffic jam. Then I can choose. I mean, if I am in traffic jam, horns, okay, and my brake pedal are two irritants to me, okay, and these are my inputs. And then I decide. I look at on which road it is, how long is the queue for the cars, and so on. And then I decide, Jane do. I will stay. I will continue with this situation. Okay. Meanwhile, many things happen. Another car comes in, bumps into you. He gets down, scolds you for no reason, and so on and so forth. So a sub encounter takes place in the traffic jam. So it's a story under story under story. And then ultimately what happens is that the time when you are through out of the traffic jam, okay, the estimated time in which it will be clear was no more there. So the payoff which you thought could be neutral or positive has turned into a negative payoff. Okay, this has happened. So then you go back, you are in unconsciously, you look at the whole situation, okay, and then your mind decides that there are two things which I should do. Is I was a fool that I did not consult my Google Assistant to show me whether there are any alternate roads, okay, or whether I should continue with this, okay, suggestion for that. And then I realized maybe I have a smart mobile, but I don't have a capability to operate that. Okay, so when I have processed that negative track of traffic jam, okay, one action items triggers into my mind that I have to learn how to use the Google Maps or how to use the Google traffic suggestions. This is one kind of an action. This is purely to a certain extent, apart from the sub encounters which took place, okay, which required sentience and feelings, okay, it was purely on a informational loop, not on sentience loop. Okay, let's have a look at another kind of event. Okay, back from that, I just passed my 12th standard examination, and then dad patted me, said you have done very nice, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then I register it. Okay, I register that. There is no action which takes place, but what happens is then when I am in an reflexive state, okay, I acknowledge that if I do good, it is not that my father always scolds me. If I do good, he also pats me. I also remember from the experience, I also look into the experience and know that the Father's Day is coming. So I put a tag, I have to wish him. The encounter is complete. So this has got nothing to do with informational encounter. This is a purely sentience encounter. Okay, so encounters can take place, okay, which are sentience and emotions related. They can take place which are information related also. Okay, so this is the model. This is the kind of the model which we are talking about. Now, if this is the type of the model, it's a nature's gift to us. This is that we have this model. However, some people use it. Some people consciously use that this is a gift, okay, and update themselves. Some people don't. Okay, we can't do anything. This is all that there is to it. What we call it as a profile of that person. Okay, and probably it is the teacher who may help him to improve the profile. The point is, this is, as I said, this is God, nature given, but my computer can do the whole of this, whether it is a sentience loop or whether it is an information loop. Okay, my computer can do this simulation pretty well. There is nothing which prevents my mechanisms to create sentience loop, okay, and also the information loops, information encounters. The trouble with this is the trouble, that it can be done, there is no doubt about that. Okay, the trouble starts when it can do a sentience loop, okay, whether it really understands, the computer really understands what it is doing. Okay, now that kind of argument is known as argument against AI, that it will ever beat human beings, and that's also known as John Searle's Chinese room argument. If you are read about that, okay, that means the computer is acting it that it will behaviorally be identical to other carbon agent is acceptable even to John Searle. Okay, he is not saying that it's not acceptable. He says that this can happen. Okay, but he says that in his Chinese, I am not going to go into that Chinese room argument, what kind of argument is that, but he says that it's a simulation. Okay, that means he really, when somebody kicks a robot, say for example, he really doesn't feel, he doesn't have that subjective experience. Okay, he doesn't have that subjective experience. And having a subjective experience and not having a subjective experience is not the case, that whether it can be done or cannot be done. Means even the robot can also look for a human friend next time under such encounters, okay, under such encounters, to give a kind of an advice to that other human being. Okay, this can happen. However, when this is happening, there are no feelings involved or sentience involved in the raw sapien or a silicon agent. We call them, when this is the case, this type of zombies which can simulate the behavior as far as the external world is concerned are called as zombies. They are known as philosophical zombies. Okay, but that this can be done, there is no doubt in anybody's mind today that this can be done. Okay. The point here again is, do we really know that the zombie has a subjective experience or does not have a subjective experience? Okay. We do not have at this moment of time agreed upon theory which can classify zombies from real sentient agents and zombies. Can we classify them? For example, we talked about the Turing test, okay, of passing the intelligence test. The zombies 100% pass the Turing test. All the Google assistants that are available to you now, okay, it's a matter of a year or two that you will never know who is on the other line, is whether it is a machine or whether it is a zombie. Okay, the point is whether he is useful. If it, I will not say he or she, whether it is useful, because at the other end who it is we don't know, so let us better call it. Okay, so this is why we are worried. We are not worried if everything is benevolent. Hmm? We are not worried if everything is benevolent. But if what, that the zombie really has got a sentience and consciousness, then what? Okay, and we have seen in the last slide, we have seen that in the last three rows, top three rows, we have seen that the input output capabilities, the ability to simulate, okay, and the bandwidth at which processing can take place if it is going to supersede us, okay, and we really do not know whether it is a zombie or not a zombie. What do we do? Okay, how do we protect ourselves? Okay. So to a certain extent, what I have done is I have tried to put forward the case that if you think that we are talking more in terms of too much long future, okay, and it will never happen, never like that, we are almost at it. Okay, we are almost at that particular state where the singularity point is there. So if this is the case, what are we supposed to do? What should we do? We need to find out an answer to this. Okay. Now, keeping this in mind, we move to something which we call it as new big questions. Okay. Now, there is a difference between new big questions which we will be talking about and the big questions which we had been talking for antiquity, virtual antiquity. Okay, those big questions had no answers. We could only ask questions, but they really had no answers. Okay, that means whole of the endeavor, okay, of the previous knowledge streams, as I will call them, okay, was to refine the questions. Apart from that, there was no question of answering the questions. Okay. Now, the new big questions which we are talking about are not of that category. For example, when we are talking about existence of existence, this is a stupid question. Okay, why should we be worried about it? Many philosophers are worried, many philosophers are not. Okay, but the big question which we will talk now are the questions which are of absolute relevance to us because we have to look deeply into it and they have answers. Okay, it's only a question of how we answer them. Okay, and whether we want to answer them and how we answer them. So let's have a look at what are the kinds of the big questions which singularity is going to pose us. Okay, and unless we know that, we will not be in a position to find out what should be the answer. What should be the answer that we should give it from the anthropocentric viewpoint. The first big questions: is the species Homo sapiens cul-de-sac in evolution? We know that there were many species which sprung during evolution and were extinct. Are we at that stage? Are we as Homo sapiens, as a species, at that stage of extinction at worst and cul-de-sac at best? For example, the cockroach is the longest living species. Okay, it is not extinct, but it is a cockroach. A cockroach has remained a cockroach. That is known as cul-de-sac. Okay, so whether we will remain cul-de-sac at a little better situation or extinct at a worse situation, and we will have to give way to something which we call it as silicon agents. This is the biggest new question. Okay. Now, if you look at the history of evolution, it has always been survival of the fittest as far as species is concerned. Okay, and if a better species, in what sense I don't know, if a better species, okay, albeit we are getting it to existence, okay, if it is better, then what? What should we do? The point here is the point lies with some kind of a question. The point is, do the species called as human has some kind of a cosmic purpose? Okay, and if we are going to get extinct, or if we are going to be made extinct by malevolence of silicon agents, okay, what kinds of purpose will the silicon agent have, what kind of purpose the silicon agents have got? Okay, now a cosmic purpose is a Pandora's box. Okay, my answer, personal, to the whole affair is that there is only one cosmic purpose. As I have always been saying, there is only one cosmic purpose. If we look at the history, prehistory, and evolution of life, okay, the purpose has always been this: that constructivity must survive. The constructors will become extinct. Constructivity must survive. The constructors will become extinct. Why? There is no question. Answer to these questions are not why. They are beliefs. When it is my belief that the cosmic purpose, if at all it exists, is only one, and that is constructivity must survive. The constructors may become extinct. Okay, and if you look at the whole evolution, this is what has happened. Okay, only those species have survived, okay, which have been able to make more and more richer structures in the surface of the earth. And if this is so, why should we be worried that we are in the cul-de-sac or whether we are going to get extinct? Big question. And what is wrong if a better race supersedes us, that is Homo sapiens? What is wrong? If you consider this as a cosmic purpose, this is the only cosmic purpose, nothing wrong in it. I mean, it is bound to happen. Okay, it is destined. I don't like that word destined. Okay. If you look at the history and saying the same in another words is, if you look at the history and look at it as to what has happened, and if we project it, this is going to happen. Okay. Instead of saying destined, I can make it soft looking and still say that. Can intelligence and wisdom develop without sentience and consciousness? As I was talking about, okay, as far as the purpose is constructivity, better and better constructs to bring into the world, is the cosmic purpose. And if they can be done without sentience or consciousness, Gordon, if he exists himself. We know that SPR, that is structural and process richness. Structural richness is what I talked about. For example, the structural richness was in neuron and dendrites. Okay, this is one kind of a structural richness. Another kind of a richness is a process richness. As far as von Neumann architecture is concerned, it is a different kind of a richness because it can simulate anything which we want. Okay, so we know that structural and process richness is a necessary condition for intelligence. That's why we are here. We are intelligent, okay, and consciousness. But is it a sufficient condition? That means, are we conscious because our structural richness is more in terms of 100 billion neurons, and one neuron can connecting to a maximum of 10,000 neurons? That means, is consciousness, what kind of property is consciousness? Is it a emergent property? Is it an absorbent property? Either it is an engineered property or whether it is an intrinsic property. We talked about properties when we talked in the last lecture. We talked about 4 different kinds of properties. So consciousness, which is a property of human beings, a very important property of human beings. Okay, according to Descartes, that's the only property which we are sure of our own existence. So, is it a intrinsic property? Is it a emergent property? Is it an absorbent property, or is it an engineered property? and we have to answer that. And unless we answer this particular question, what property is consciousness, okay, we never know whether the Homo sapiens will achieve sentience and intelligence. That is the trouble. We are not able to classify consciousness as a property, either as an intrinsic property, as an emergent property, as an absorbent property, or as an engineered property. Okay, one of the thinking is that, do we really know what is consciousness? Okay. The answer to this is, I mean, this question has been there always. Okay, and philosophers have tried to answer them. Religion has tried to answer them. Science never tried to answer them. But it's now science which has to answer this question. Now they have to answer that question because of the situation of singularity. Okay, so what kind of a property is it? Is unless we know that, if only a structural richness is a necessary and sufficient condition, then John Searle is wrong. Then John Searle is wrong. I mean, we really do not know when the zombies will get into something which we call it as sentience and consciousness. Not only that, even if we are anthropocentric and if we want to regulate the research into artificial intelligence, we do not know when to stop. That also is not known to us because we don't know what is consciousness. Okay, so one of the ways to answer this question is very simple. Construct one entity which is conscious. Okay, you will know what is consciousness. Okay, and how can I construct one entity which is conscious? The answer to this question is, in order to do that, okay, uh, we need a conceptual model of consciousness, and that conceptual model of consciousness should be such that it is an operable model. It should be a quantitative model. It should be a model which can explain what is meant by a quantitative consciousness, quantitative size of consciousness. Okay, and it will also explain what is qualia, when qualia occurs and when qualia doesn't occur. Okay, it has a model of that particular kind is required. And unless we have that model, we cannot construct an entity. The current research in this area is concentrated on creating what is known as a quantitative theory of consciousness. Okay, that one of the most successful theories in this area is known as a integrated information theory, that was put forward by Giulio Tononi. So it is an Italian neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and that was done in year 2005. It is known as the integrated information theory, and it has gone through several revisions, and the last revision was in 2014, and it is known as IIT 3.0, that is integrated information theory of consciousness. And what that theory does is, okay, it is it gives a mathematical model, and the moment there is a mathematical model, it means that a physical construct can be done based on that. Okay, a mathematical model which will be in a position to do several things. One, it should be in a position to classify zombies as zombies. Okay, clearly. At this moment of time, John Searle only says that we cannot recognize zombie, but on what? He has no answer to that. This theory tries to answer that question in a quantitative manner. It also tries to answer a question, okay, that is a photodiode conscious? Okay, and then he defines something which is known as panpsychism. Okay, this theory is roughly in correspondence to theory of panpsychism, which was put forward by all the many philosophers, and it is able to attach a number to consciousness, size of consciousness, numerical size of consciousness, it is able to attach, and it is able to show that some agents are more conscious than some other agents. Not only that, an agent, a conscious agent in certain state may not be in the state of, I mean, the consciousness in that particular state is different quantitatively from that. For example, when an agent is in coma, say for example, okay, or when the agent, in our case, when the silicon agent, okay, is surviving on not plugged in power but internal power, it is kind of a coma. Okay, so it will be in a position to classify the agents into something which we call it as, okay, quantitatively it will be able to say what are the, when a qualia will occur and so on. It can show what, how much is the size difference in consciousness between a animal or a dog and, say for example, a photodiode and so on. And it will be able to classify a zombie as a zombie and then conscious agent as a conscious agent. Okay, one of the things is, we are not going to go into that theory, but just to give an idea as to where the research is moving. Okay, the research at this moment of time is concentrated not on AI, because AI is a technology, right? AI is a technology, it is not a science. Okay, unless I have a model, okay, AI cannot do anything further. Okay, AI cannot create a conscious entity. To create a conscious entity, you require a theory. Okay, so the lot of attempts are being done in this particular area of creating a quantitative theory of consciousness. One of the attempts, as I said, was by that scientist, neuroscientist Tononi. But the point is that if this is the case, then we will be able to say what is a sufficient condition. And why I will be able to say what is a sufficient condition, then all that I have to say that the agent, silicon agent, to be equivalent in consciousness to carbon agent, this much structural or integrated information is required. Okay, it will be able to quantify. And if we are able to do that, we also know an answer to this: never allow that to happen. Okay, so if you think that you should ban ban research into what is consciousness, you should never do it, because that is going to give answer to both the people who want to remain anthropocentric and who want to say that we will be cul-de-sac. Okay, what path you select is a different story, but banning the research on consciousness, okay, consciousness series or quantification of consciousness should never be done. Okay, because either it will take it to a runaway path, but at the same time it will allow you that you don't go into a runaway path. If SPR is sufficient condition, then the silicon agents will supersede the carbon agent. There is no doubt about that. If it is not, SPR is not a sufficient condition, then there is a Pandora's box of mysticism. That means if it is not a sufficient condition, that means if structural richness is not the, structural and process richness is not the sufficient condition, then it has to be either a, it has to be absorbent property. And if the property is absorbent, then it has to exist independent of energy and material. Okay, and if it has to be independent of energy and material, okay, as information as we know it today has to reside either in energy or matter. Its information is nothing but an imprint into either energy or on matter. When we are communicating information, it is an imprint on energy. Okay, when we are storing information, it is an imprint on material. Okay, but we know of no mechanism as to where is the information if it is not in matter and energy. And if this is the case, okay, then it opens up, because if it is not a sufficient condition, it has to open up something which we call it as a Pandora's box of mysticism. We will have to fall back on the same path of whatnot, okay, which we have come a long way from that, okay, in a way in which we have been able to improve our quality of life, okay. So it will give rise. So either way we are in trouble. Exactly how much SPR is required for sentience and consciousness, I talked about this, okay. And there is a theory, as I was talking about, if this theory proves, I mean, this has been experimentally tested, okay. I'm not talking about what are known as neurological correspondences to consciousness. For example, the brain activity, and the state of consciousness, okay, can be correlated. A number can be attached, but the number doesn't pop out from the theory. It is a measured number, okay. Looks that we are attaching a number, looks we are becoming quantitative, we are not really, we are only classifying. At most what we are doing is we are attaching an ordinal scale, not a cardinal scale, but an ordinal scale to consciousness. That is not good enough. So exactly how much SPR is required for sentience and consciousness, okay, is a big $1 million question, or maybe $1 billion question, or maybe question which challenges the survival of humanity. Apart from that, tapered from consciousness. Suppose the consciousness is acquired by agents, not only carbon agent but silicon agents. Can we at least ensure that they are benevolent? Okay, this is the next question. Can we say that they are benevolent? The answer to this question is again, do we know whether we are benevolent? Okay, the answer is we don't know. We see malevolence existing as well as benevolence existing. We do not have a mechanism by which benevolence will supersede malevolence. Okay, so how do we measure benevolence? Okay, answer to that question. My answer to that question. My answer to that question is any object, process, entity is better benevolent if it is on a constructive path than a destructive path. Any agent whose activities are constructive is benevolent. If they are destructive, they are not, they are malevolent. So this is the only possible definition of benevolence in terms of cosmic purpose. Okay. But these are the big Qs, and we have to answer these big Qs. Particularly, we have to answer the big Q of how much structural and process richness is required for an agent to become conscious. Okay. So unless we answer these questions, okay, we have no mechanisms, okay, to go either this way, go consciously into cul-de-sac, or consciously avoid our cul-de-sac, okay, and put Roseps into cul-de-sac. Okay, not we, but Roseps into cul-de-sac. We now move towards the possible solutions. Okay, so we have given you, to sum up till now, we had said what is singularity. I've given you a good enough poignantness that the singularity is not far off. Okay, it is very much there. It's very much lurking in our lifetimes. And now we are going to see that forget the old BQs. We are faced with new BQs, and they are BQs in such a fashion that they are going to hit us back. The previous BQs were not hitting us back in any way. Okay, let's move ahead. Let us look at what is meant by wisdom. Okay, now this is an operational definition of wisdom. And when I say an operational definition, this means that if you follow it up as if it is an algorithm, we will get the answer. Pinpoint the issue at hand. This is the first step. Then browse your experience base. Browse systemic and trans-domain knowledge base. Trans-domain knowledge base means experience base. Then generate all possible actions. Okay, now we are looking in the model which we discussed. Okay, generate all possible action. Who generates all possible actions? The processes, processing mechanisms of what? Sentience, consciousness, intelligence, and intelligence. They generate. Okay. What does wisdom do? It selects one action out of the many which have been created. So evaluate internal and external impacts of that action. Okay, that's payoffs. Okay, assess execution difficulty and action payoffs in short term and long term. Check alignment with pursuit and values. Decide and execute the action. Okay, if you are following this path, you are following a wisdemic path. A wisdemic path can be short circuited. Okay, in the model which we talked about, the wisdemic path can be short circuited, and it is often short circuited, okay, when the event is what we call it as a, in carbon agents, when the event is survival threats. Okay, okay, and then this path is short circuited in the sentient by the sentience loop. Okay, sometimes it is short circuited in the information loop also. Okay, the problem may not be great and we need not worry about too much. Jaane do, kar do. Okay, when we say that, okay, we are short circuiting the wisdom path. However, for an agent to improve his profile towards benevolence, okay, his own as well as the society's benevolence, okay, wisdemic processes have to take place not only in an individual but in almost all individuals which form the society. It has to become a way of life, way of decision making, not only for an individual but for the society. Difficult. Wisdom is both personal and at social level. Only personal level wisdom is not going to take us far. Okay, it's also the social level wisdom. I mean, at the social level, the wisdom has to take over the actions, that they are not from sentience point of view or only from informational point of view. We'll refer back to this, okay, very soon. Wisdom requires experience, knowledge, inferencing, rationality, values, pursuits. Note that the definition of the wisdom has no reference to sentience and consciousness. In the above definition, there is no reference to sentience and consciousness. That means wisdom can occur in roseps, as it also can happen in case of siceps or carbon agents and silicon agents. I think I have to rush. At social level, long-term wisdemic action can only be taken by a group of wisdemic individuals at social level. Okay, this is important, and now we enter into something which is controversial. Okay, which is controversial to the way governance exists today, not only in India, everywhere in the world. Now, as we said, before we can take any kind of a wisdemic actions, or choose a wisdemic action at individual level or social level, we need to define what are pursuits for the individual as well as for the society. So pursuits are both at the individual level as well as at the social level. At the individual level, say for example, my the four grand pursuits, okay, which have something which we can call it as a biological origin also. Okay, some pursuits are given to us by the evolution or by the biology. One is survival, another is pleasure. Survival, from survival we can split into a number of sub goals of survival. It is survival is a composite affair. From survival we can take, it could be safety, it could be food, or could be lots of them. So survival, pleasure, virtues, that means conforming to social norms, okay, not doing something which is against social norms. Okay, whether the social norms are benevolent or not is a lurking question. But and freedom, not only we intend to conform, we also kind of require at least a restricted freedom from the governance. So these, and then urge to understand. Okay, apart from pleasure, there exists an urge to understand in every individual, very strong motive, so very strong pursuit, and wish to control. Okay, these are the individual pursuits. At the social level, the pursuit should be, I will not say are, should be minimal governance and maximum freedom to the members of the society, and knowledge and technology for abundance and immortality. So these could be our social pursuits, and unless we have the pursuit, we don't have the way in which we want to move ahead. Now we look at, very briefly we look at what is meant by values. Okay, the word value occurs in three different contexts. One is mathematical, which is logical value or a numerical value, we forget about it. Another is economical value, we forget about that. We look at an axiological way of looking at the value. Okay, and even in axiological way, there are two things. One is an aesthetical value, and there are two other values which we call it is a moral values and normative values. Normative values correspond to social norms. Well, moral values also correspond to individual. So we have the social and pursuit relative values. Okay, and then we have also the personal and agent relative values. So values are two kinds of values are there. One is pursuit relative, social pursuit relative values, and agent relative values. Value can be attached to any object, process, action, or name. Okay. What is the output of research and technology? The output of research, okay, is a technology. Okay. One output of research is technology whose output is products and services. But output of research is also creation of memes, as we talked about last time. Okay, and memes is, as we said, we describe what is meant by a meme. Okay, so value can be attached to objects, processes, actions, or memes. In our scheme, we judge value as positive, negative, or neutral based on its effect on quality of life, and we'll call that as Q value. Now we are slowly moving towards the type of the solution or type of the anthropocentric solution that we should adopt under such situation. And then we call, okay, we look at the pursuits and we have to attach something, we have to define values, and we, out of that we single out a value called as quality of life value, and we call that as a Q value. And before any action takes place, we have to ask what is the Q value. If the Q value is positive, go ahead and do it. If the Q value is negative, suppress it or regulate it. If the Q value is neutral, okay, permit. So, for example, a Q value of secularity is definitely positive. Okay. However, the word secularity has been twisted by all politicians in such a bad way that I hate to write that word secularity unless I define it. Okay. And the definition of secularity is disassociation of state from religion. The only definition of secularity is, this is the definition of secularity: disassociation of state from religion. Q value of discrimination, any kind of a discrimination, a race discrimination, male female discrimination, economic discrimination, okay, the value is always negative. But what is the Q value of AI research? Okay, so the question which we have to answer is, what is the Q value of AI research which is taking place? Probably the Q value of consciousness research is zero, neither positive or negative, because it can be used for positive value purposes or negative value purposes. Okay, so it is zero. So under those circumstances, we should allow. Okay, but also if the result is, I mean, if it is carrying the humanity towards non-anthropocentric way of living or way of progress, should forget that. We should regulate that. Being finite will provide us profound values. Being finite will provide us. We talked about that science is going infinitesimal and infinite, and those don't provide us values which are profound. So I will push it over because against time at this moment of time. But PQL and SQL, we will define what is meant by PQL and SQL. We have to derive a set of objective values based on human quality of life. Many people think that human quality of life cannot be defined. Okay, the first reaction whenever I talk to a group of people or whenever I talk to an individual, it is always quality of life cannot be defined. Okay, the point is that to a certain extent, yes, it cannot be defined. But there are definitely certain points on which everybody will agree. So let us not, why not look at what is that minimal state which can definitely be called as quality of life. Okay. These values are to be derived in spite of relativeness, dilemmas, randomness, and limits of understanding. These values, quality of life values, have to derive. There are troubles in deriving quality of life values, but that there are troubles does not mean that we cannot generate at least one or five values. Okay. Beyond five, there may be, you can always question whether it should be taken as a value or not, but at least five values we can definitely define, then at least use them. Okay, for example, to give you an idea, give you an example, uh, the state of the country was only measured in terms of GDP. It was Amartya Sen who said, I mean Amartya Sen with along with the group, who attached something which included something like education and health, okay, in the well-being of the society. And this was the first step. I mean, economists never, I mean, only economy, if I mean GDP will never give you what is the state in that particular country. This is an attempt to attach a Q value. Okay, this is an attempt to measure, and he has also shown how to measure the health. He has also shown how to measure the education. Okay. So if we look at it, let's have a quick look at what could be the PQL and SQL. The PQL corresponds to the personal quality of life, physical and mental health. I don't think anybody will deny that this is a quality of life value. Okay. Then capability, commensurate income. Okay, now the trouble starts. Everybody wants income which he gets at least 10 times that, but never asks a question, is it commensurate with my output to the society? Okay, we will start with the troubles. Okay, but it is definitely is a why it is a quality measure for quality of life is the moment you realize this, okay, your stress reduces. Moment you realize this, your stress is going to reduce. Occupation of choice, okay, that I should get into an occupation of choice and still make a living. Okay. Then relational links, my links with my spouse, my family, my kinship, my friends, my colleagues, okay, and then unknown society. Okay, it is the links with the unknown society which are questionable. Time surplus for pursuits. This is very important. Unless there was a time surplus available for pursuits, okay, that time agrarian society, agrarian transition gave us time to follow our pursuits. Okay, if we are hunters and gatherers, okay, we will not be here to discuss what is quality of life. Freedom to follow pursuits, unbroken privacy. okay, which is again questionable. Facebook has shown that, so we know all that, okay, and spiritual well-being. Spiritual does not mean anything. The word I shudder to use certain words. One of the word is spiritual, okay, because immediately mysticism gets attached to it. Okay, there is something which is called as spiritual, which is not mystic. Okay, and there is something which is spiritual, which is not materialistic. Okay, on both sides it is troublesome. Public goods and services, nobody will doubt about that. We should have good roads and good communication and whatnot and whatnot. Security from assaults to the individual members of the society. Fundamental rights, questionable document, okay, because there has been a lot of trouble on the fundamental rights, okay, but hello, can you hear me? Okay, then there is no trouble. So fundamental rights, then contributional opportunities, for equal opportunities, contributional opportunities for all. Then participation in governance, this is another social value. Then non-discrimination and unpolluted ecosystem. Okay, what is happening now is just pull one unpolluted ecosystem and then subordinate all other values. That's a bad practice. Okay, who doesn't want unpolluted ecosystem? We all want. Okay, educational opportunities. So these are some of the what we call as qualities of, social and personal values that we have to cherish. And even if you stop at this particular list, it is good enough to move ahead. Okay. Anything I add, if you go from the bottom, it will start raising questions. Then we look at what is meant by progress. The idea of progress rests on the belief that the growth of system richness, structural richness, okay, and process richness, and flourishing of the species go together. This is an axiom. This is probably the what we know as enlightenment axiom, okay, whose current strongest contributor is Steven Pinker. Okay. We have progressed from barbarity to civilization through a gradual process of enlightenment. In short, progress is equal to increase in human quality of life, either personal quality of life as well as social quality of life. So now what we have to do is we have to select actions in such a way that human quality of life is at the center, and we have to spin out the actions which are required, which the singularity is going to pose us. I'm going to move through this very fast. What we require is we require human quality of increase in the human quality of life in material front, on the emotive front, on the relational front. Okay, both intimate relations, kinship relations, friendship relations, and social relations also. Then cognitive front, that means availability of information to all. Questionable. Availability of information to all, that is the information right. Okay. Then on the cognitive front, transactional front, that means transactions between members of the society. Organizational front, that the organizations which become the pillars into the society. So, and Wisdemic front. So all of them, okay, have to translate into personal quality of life. That means defining and agreeing upon as a whole society on what is personal quality of life and what is social quality of life is a need of the day. Okay, certain movement towards that has definitely started. Not that it has not been started, and governments have started. okay, publishing various kinds of indices, wellness index, health index, and um, there are about 110 indices which have been defined at this moment of time. The whole idea of wisdemic thinking is to convert changes in the ecosystem of humanity towards its long-term well-being. And challenge is to create benevolent pursuits for both proceps and siceps. This is the biggest challenge. Okay. Now we look at mechanism which is required to achieve this. Okay, this is what we want to achieve. We now have to look forward to something which we call it as mechanism to achieve this. Now the controversy is going to start. Okay, hold your questions. We talk about two things. One is breadth of information, and second thing is depth of knowledge. These two things are different. A breadth of information and depth of knowledge are different. Okay, one corresponds to general intelligence, one corresponds to specific expertise, as we have talked about, and we have an issue at hand, for example. And the issue at hand could be like this: whether one should go ahead and ban inorganic fertilizers. Okay, this is an issue at hand. Okay, or the issue at hand could be of this particular kind: how much governmental funds should be allocated to defense. There are several types of issues which we are talking about, or whether there should be a regulation on what we call it as research and technology, sensitive research and technology. There are several issues which are facing us, and that is, suppose we have an issue at hand, then we distinguish between two kinds of stratas in our society. One I call them as talkies, which are politicians and TV anchors. I hate them because they do a lot of bad than good to the whole of the viewers. Okay, and religion was a soft medicine. Media is something horrible. Okay, so talkies, I call them as talkies. Oh, like talkies, we also have something which we call as techies. Okay, and particularly IITians and researchers. Okay, who do research and technology for the kick of it, and that kick may be only getting something out of it or getting money out of it. Okay, so, and if these two strata of the society are going to decide on the issue at hand, we are in trouble. We are in deep trouble. Okay, what can these two people decide about the actions that we have to take place for the singularity, how to stall the singularity? So we need something different than this. And how can this, and we don't want to give up something which we call it as democracy. Okay, giving up democracy is suicidal at the least. So how do we come out of, how, what kind of a mechanism do we need in order to do this? Okay, techies and talkies will have no rights to vote. We distinguish between people who can vote for a particular issue. I am not talking about governance. I am not talking about party-based governance, political party-based governance. First thing that we have to do is to move out from party-based governance to issue-based governance. Okay, this is the first change which is required in the society. It has to be issue-based governance, and the party is only an administrator to carry out the decision. Okay, and who should take the decisions on the, for example, whether to, as we said, whether to use GM seats. Okay, who is going to take that decision, right? We have seen politicians, okay, who were against certain kind of power stations, and when they came in power, they themselves installed those power stations. What the hell on the earth? Okay, the first thing that has to happen is we have to move away from techies and talkies to a strata of people, okay, who are wisdemic, wisdemic strata of people, and a particular person may not be wisdemic on all issues. We have to have an issue-based governance, democratic decision, still issue-based. For example, it is not impossible. It would have been impossible long time back, okay, because of the cost, okay. But Brexit, for example, the Brexit poll was only one indicator as to how issue-based governance can take place, okay. Whether what happened with the Brexit poll, it was good, whether it was good for the society or bad for the society is a different story. It was a democratic decision taken by people, not by the ruling party, on issue based. Okay, we have to move from something which is political decision making, okay, on various issues which face us in terms of well-being, quality, and so on, and singularity. Before we move to the questions relating to singularity, we need to create people who can really talk about that and give a opinion, informed opinion. The word informed is bad. Wisdemic opinion on that. Okay. So we need wisdemic individuals, that is, will be the voters for the decision. And it will be published. And who will be the wisdemic individuals? They are qualified to vote on that particular issue. They have to pass a test called as qualification to vote on that particular issue. Okay. Looks utopian. Everything which starts for the first time is always utopian. Even the democracy 500 years back was utopian, but we have come to democracy. We have now to upgrade ourselves from democracy to issue based governance, and this is urgent due to several reasons, because the way the society is going to change in the coming 50 years is going to be troublesome for the society, troublesome for Homo sapiens. Wisdomism is going to be issue based wisdemic governance by consensus, okay, and that consensus has to be greater than 90% of the voters, and this is the change, which is first change which is required before we can address the issues which are long term issues which we are talking about. Social regulation over research and technology is the issue at hand, and for that we need to create people, wisdemic people, who can talk about that. People may say that we have Niti Ayog. Okay, say for example, the point is that Niti Ayog consists of experts so far, experts which are very few. Okay, we need a critical mass of wisdemic experts, okay, and the issue will be published and you have to vote electronically. You can hack electronically, but this is what is needed, okay. This doesn't change that it can be hacked, true or false, I'm not going into it. That it can be hacked does not say that, does not indicate that we should not go for issue based governance. Issue based governance is the need of the day. If we have issue based governance and then we start putting first what we call as smaller and smaller question and then bigger question as we move ahead, okay, probably we may get answer to this, and probably the only answer which we have to have in coming future in the about in I mean if we are at 2020, I mean roughly around 2020 today, within 30 years we have to take a decisions. Within 30 years we have to take a decision as to what is required. The answer to the question of what we are saying, that Rosapiens and Sapiens from an anthropocentric point of view, is that symbiosis is the only answer. Symbiosis means a coexistence of ROSEPs and SISEPs towards mutual benefit of each. Okay. Now, this means we need to have enriched consciousness, and to enrich consciousness, you don't have to go to, I mean, tinkering about your genetic makeup. It is not required at this moment of time. You can do that also if it is required. But what we call it as consciousness consists of various awarenesses, uh, and educating the people, moving away from that particular Baba Adam way, that first 6 to 22 years you put it onto education and then bye bye education. Okay, that very attitude has to vanish. You cannot allow that to happen. Okay, so you need to enrich consciousness of the general society. Okay, and consciousness means you should be able to not measure intelligence quotient. You should be able to measure consciousness quotient of every individual. Okay, and we need to have mechanisms to improve that consciousness quotient. We also need, we will be facing with challenge of extreme intelligence coming from Rosepians, and even under those circumstances, even under those situations, we have to do something which we call it as we have to move towards symbiosis. But here symbiosis is not between two species as it is biologically, it is symbiosis between Roseps and Siceps. And for that we need to design rules or regulations for Roseps. Very first attempt to do that was done by probably Asimov. Okay, when he hello, yeah, when he enunciated three rules for robots. The first rule, if you know it, maybe bear with me for some time. If you don't know it, maybe listen it carefully. This was done long time back. Okay, when robots were not that intelligent. At this moment of time, I also remember a novel. Okay, and that novel is from Arthur C. Clarke, who is and the novel name of the novel is Childhood's End. Childhood's End. And there the problem considered there was not Roseps and Siceps. The problem was not from that. The problem was aliens and Homo sapiens. Okay, and then the aliens come as known as something for guardians and so on and so forth. And the point is, the end of that novel, to say the least, is poignant. Okay, and I am the best pianist on the surface of the earth because he was the only living Homo sapien. The novel is excellent. Okay, probably a similar kind of a novel needs to be written on Roseps and Siceps. But coming back to Asimov, he said three rules. One, first rule of conduct, morality for robots. The first rule is that a robot, under all circumstances, will not harm a human either by action or by inaction. This is rule number one. Okay. Obviously, this is anthropocentric. Rule number two, in the event that there is a danger to the existence of the robot of self, he will try to protect himself, his own integrity, provided it does not contradict with rule number one. And rule number three, rule number I forget that rule number three, but it was something similar, which which morally restricted the rights of the robots. Okay, we need to do something. Not only that, we need to morally restrict or legally restrict the rights of the human beings also. And the way law is formed is not quite conducive to that. But these rules are required as a urgent on an urgent basis to create a symbiosis between proceps and siceps. Ultimately, what is going to happen or what should happen according to me, okay, in a positive spirit of the whole thing is that we regulate the technology. If it is going to make ourselves either in the cul-de-sac form or in the extinction form, we should deny that. And what we should have is a symbiosis between Voceps and Siceps. Symbiosis, symbiosis between. Now you are you able to listen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, between Voceps and Siceps, and we have done that. Say for example, people who landed on moon was a Sicep in a Vocep shell. This is exactly what happened when we are going to go to something which we call it as to Mars. We have no other mechanism but to have a Sicep in a shell of Rosep. Okay, and what is a Rosep shell? A Rosep shell is a it's okay. A Rosep shell, a Rosep shell is a shell which is enhanced in terms of inputs and outputs, which is enhanced in terms of cognitive abilities, and which is enhanced in terms of wisdom. Okay, so the only symbiosis which can take place is the symbiosis between Roseps and Siceps. We should become the Sicep core in a Rosep shell, and then not only on the surface of the earth, but we should be able to leave earth, okay, in search of new worlds, as was what should happen. And enhance capability of Siceps, okay, by genetic modifications if required, and then regulate the capabilities of Proceps and get into a symbiosis, and that's the only answer. And in order to do that, we have to, as we said, we have to look at every research that is taking place, whether it is research in genetics, whether it is research in genetics, whether it is research in um, artificial intelligence, whether it is research in consciousness. Okay, we have to allow that research, but or the technology to develop or meme to spread a non-social meme to spread. There are many researches which have spread non-social memes that also should be curtailed. Okay, and that's the only way for a real good future of us, and that's it. We talk about a movement called as a movement for Wisdemic Individuals Group. I will skip through this slide. A wisdemic individual is a person who understands science and humanity and can guess what technology will get developed, what would be the products and services coming out of the technology, how will that affect human life, and will know what memes will be generated out of the research and other research, and whether they will be benevolent to Homo sapiens. Okay. This is what we call it as a wisdemic person. The members will have knowledge to evaluate physical, economical, psychological, and moral impacts of products, services, and MEMS in short term and long term. The members of the WIG will have capabilities to work as consultants on various issues of research and technology, governmental funding of projects, spread of knowledge and across the members of the society, and much more. That's what we call it as a movement towards wisdemic individuals group. To qualify as members of the Wisdemic individual group, the person will have to undergo and grasp basic knowledge framework of objects, worlds, processes, actions, technologies, and pursuits. I mean, that means only technological or only scientific or only humanities is not going to make that person a wise person. Okay, he needs to know basic conceptual framework of both humanities as well as science and technology. He need the science and technology also need science, technology, and humanities needs again a common universal formal language to be designed. Okay, I mean the language in which humanities are presented and the language in which science and technology is presented, no correlation can be established. We need something, we need to improve our knowledge, we need to improve our knowledge to a large extent. The qualification will be through a, I mean, qualification that whether a person can be is qualified to vote on a particular issue will be through an international agency of truly, I mean, through a truly international agency, irrespective of the cultural differences between different countries, whatever they may be. And we need to do that because it's not only, we have overcome the nuclear threat, okay, to a great extent. Okay, we the threat which is posing the which is in front of the mankind today is not nuclear threat. Okay, it is a threat of extinction, and we need to change the individuals as well as society in all, okay, towards accepting this particular challenge without restricting the technology, without restricting the progress which we have done through the technology. We still will have to do it. Probably we can go a little slower on the pace provided we are ready to accept the population control. That's it for the time being, and I will like to wrap up with what we call it as the activities which we intend to do or through circles, study circles and groups is creating a critical mass of wisdemic individuals through wisdemic schooling, persuasion of persuasion of persuasion of individuals to take active participation in governance. This also is a must based on the governance, issue-based governance, knowledge restructuring on the wisdemic point of view. And now this is one thing which we have to do, and this is on what we call it as spread, regarding the spread of wisdom movement. Other is research in terms of promote genetic and nuclear research for longer and healthier lifespans, promote research in expert robots for creating abundance of goods and services, quantification of intelligence, sentience, benevolence, and wisdom. This is, I think, the greatest amount of research which is required in this particular area. If we have to address what we call it as the singularity and creating a universal formal language or wisdemics. So these are the activities which we intend to take in various forms. We have not, at this moment of time, decided on the mechanism and forms and so on and so forth. We would appreciate your feedback on both the presentations, and we will appreciate your active participation in the study circles or the mechanisms which we may create. And it is very easy now because the technology has grown to such a point that you don't have to physically meet. We can electronically meet, which was previously impossible. Now we can do that. And thank you very much for your patience. And it is open for questions and answers.